Go ahead and open your social studies book to page 252, and then open up your vocabulary notebook to the page where you did the vocabulary words for lesson 1. We have one vocabulary word in this skills lesson, and we're just going to add it to chapter 8, lesson 1 vocabulary. So you should have both of those out. Today the skill we're going to be working on is we're going to be working on how to read different types of charts and graphs. And today's chart or graph is a flow chart. So, why it matters. Sometimes a process is easier to understand if it is represented in a diagram or a drawing. And we know that. Sometimes we need to see exactly how something works and able to understand it. So a flow chart is a diagram that shows the steps in a process. So we are going to add it to the words from Monday's lesson. So we're starting with number 5. So vocabulary word number 5 is flow chart. And a flow chart is a diagram that shows the steps in a process. So following a flow chart will help you to understand exactly how something is done. The flow chart on page 253 shows how people use wheat to make bread. Follow these steps to understand the flow chart. So let's look. I have a picture on the board and you have it in your book, but now you can see where I'm pointing out as we go. So go ahead, let's look at this flow chart on page 253. So step 1 is to read the title of the flow chart because the title tells you what process the chart explains. So anytime we have a chart or a graph, we have to have a title. In this case, this flow chart is going to tell us how wheat is made into bread. So there's the title. That's the first thing we look at. Now we know exactly what this process that this flow chart is going to tell us is. Step 2 is to follow the direction of the arrows because the arrows tell you the order of the steps. So here's our arrows and they point down. That means we're starting at the top and we're moving down. Some flow charts might start at the bottom and have arrows pointing up. Some flow charts may be set up in a circle, and so they may have arrows that point and they tell you which direction to go. We've seen a lot of flow charts in our science book. We saw some early on with the life cycle of a berry. We saw one with the life cycle of, I think it was maybe a frog, or there was definitely one, a wood nymph. More recently, we saw one with a flow chart of the water cycle. Anytime that you have kind of steps in a process with arrows, that is usually a flow chart, and that's what we're seeing here. So our arrows are pointing down. That means we start at the top and we go down. Step 3 is to read through the entire chart. Read each label or text box. Think about how the pictures relate to words. So in this flow chart, we have text boxes. But a lot of our science flow charts, we just had labels where it said, like on the one where we did the flow chart of the water cycle. It said over on the ocean it had evaporation, and then there was an arrow going up to the clouds, and then there was an arrow pointing to condensation, and it just labeled each step. Here we have text boxes. Because each step isn't labeled, it tells us a little bit about it. So a text box is something where you may have full sentences or phrases. So let's look at step 4, and then we'll read through this flow chart. Step 4 is pay attention to the order of the steps. On some flow charts, one step can lead to more than one possible result. Now in this flow chart we see where there is really it's just showing one possible result. But if we think about the flow chart from the water cycle, after it was precipitation, we saw one arrow which led to groundwater, one arrow which led back to the ocean, one arrow that led to some trees and transpiration. So sometimes one step, like in the water cycle, the precipitation can lead to several different results. The water can go back to the ocean or to the lakes or to streams. It can go down mountains and end up as groundwater, or it can land on the leaves of trees or plants and end up as part of transpiration. So in this case, we just see one result for each one. Now there may be more, but this flow chart is only showing us one result for each step. So, step 1. Farmers use machines to harvest wheat in late spring or early summer. Then they ship the wheat grains to a flour mill. And we can see that this text box relates to this picture because we see the farmer harvesting the wheat. He's on his combine. I think that's what that is. He's on his combine and he's harvesting all that wheat. We can see back here and on the right are places that have already been harvested, and then up to the left and up top we have what still needs to be harvested. Now we're going to follow the arrow to step 2, which says, at the mill, machines clean the wheat grains and grind them into flour. The flour is bagged and shipped to a bread factory. So here in this picture we see a bread factory. We see some people working in a bread factory. So they talk about the bread factory in this step, and then they show a picture of it. Or no, you know what? That might be, actually, that's probably not a factory since our next picture is a factory. This is probably the mill where they're grinding the wheat into flour. Then we follow the next step, and step 3 says, at the bread factory, bakers make the flour into dough. They shape it into loaves and bake the loaves in huge ovens. So now we see the bread factory. This was the mill where they ground the wheat up into flour. Now we're at the bread factory. Then we're going to follow the arrow to step 4, which says, sliced and packaged bread is shipped to grocery stores in trucks. At the grocery stores, people buy the bread to make sandwiches and other food. And so now we see a girl whose mom or dad has bought the bread and she's eating it. She's eating a sandwich. She used it to make a sandwich. So this is the flow chart of how wheat is made into bread, where the first step is how we get the very first ingredients, and the last step is how we then use that bread. So what we're going to do now is we're going to answer these practice questions just the way that we do the quick checks and the, what are these ones called? Reading check questions. So I'm going to ask it. You're going to write the answer in your vocabulary notebook under the definition for flowchart, and then you'll play the video and check your answer. So if you did get it wrong, you can fix it with your pencil. Number 1, where does wheat go after it is harvested? So use that flowchart to answer the question and write it in your notebook. Practice writing, do write in complete sentences so that you can get the practice. Okay, and so the answer to that question is, it goes to a mill. It goes from the farmer harvests it and then sends it to the mill, where we see in step 2. Now, number 2, what happens after the flour is made into dough? So again, find the answer on your flowchart and write it in a complete sentence in your notebook. Okay, well in step 3, we can see that after the bakers make the flour into dough, they then shape it into the loaves. So after that wheat is made, or that flour is made into dough, it is then shaped into loaves. Now number 3, which steps in this process require shipping? Remember, shipping is where we get goods from one place to another. Remember we learned about that with ports. We also learned about how trucks do it, how we ship through boats. So which of these steps require shipping? Okay, well the answer is, once the bread is made, this step requires shipping because it has to be shipped from this factory to grocery stores all over the country or the area. Technically, really all of the steps require some sort of shipping, but this is the most, between this step and this step, is where the most important shipping goes on. Because here, it might just be the farmer's truck, and then here it might just be the mill's truck bringing it to a local bakery, but here is where it then has to be sent all over. And it's not all necessarily going to go to the same place, because each grocery store does not have their own special baker and mill and everything. So it's going to go from here to probably just one place. And then once that once that wheat is made into flour, then it might go to several different factories, but it'll probably just go to one local bread factory. And then from the bread factory, that's when it will go all over. Now, on a larger scale, that could happen in every step, but on a small scale, like with a small family farm, it's probably going to go from one place, all of it's going to go here, and then all of it's going to go here, and then here is where it's going to spread out to different stores and areas. Maybe some restaurants too. Okay, so now that's it for talking about flowcharts. So what I want you to do now is you're basically going to do the apply. Where it says apply, it says work with a partner to make a flowchart. Write each step on a strip of paper. Find or draw a picture to show each step. Then paste the words and pictures in order onto a sheet of poster board. Connect the steps with arrows and give your flowchart a title. So we're going to change that a little bit because you're just going to work on your own. So and you also don't have to use a poster board. So what you can do is think of any process. It needs to have at least 4 steps and at most 6 steps. So you need to think of a process that has 4 to 6 steps, and then you are going to create a flowchart. You do not have to do this on separate sheets of paper. You can create a poster board if you'd like, but you don't have to. You can do it on one sheet of paper. Make sure you get it out of your clean paper binder, not any of your notebooks, or you can use a piece of computer paper. You could also use a piece of light colored construction paper, but preferably either a sheet of clean lined paper from your clean paper binder or a piece of computer paper if you have it. That's fine too. But what I want you to do is first you need to come up with a title for your flowchart. Then you need to come up with the steps. Remember, it has to have at least 4 steps and it needs to have 6 steps at the most. You can do any type of process you can think of. It can be something you can do. You can think of something more on a larger scale like what we have in our book, where there may be factories involved. It can be something like making your favorite meal. It could be making, I don't know, whatever you want. It doesn't have to be something big like this. It can be, or it can be something you can do yourself. But you're going to create a flowchart, title it first, then it needs to come up with the steps. Make sure you have your arrows. You do need to do text boxes rather than labels because I want you to write sentences. Make sure you write complete sentences for each step. Remember, at least 4, at most 6. You may draw pictures if you'd like, but you do not have to do the pictures. But you do need to title it and then come up with the steps and write it in the correct order with the arrows pointing in the correct way. So that's it. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to me later on and I can help to clarify if I need to. If not, go ahead, get started, and create your flowchart.